This past couple weeks, I have played a frankly concerning amount of Stadium, and now I may be in need of professional mental health help. That being said, it comes with its benefits, like being able to make this video. You see, I have spent days labbing every item in the game, basically. Both finding builds that I can use them in, as well as finding techs, synergies, and bugs with them, where they interact strangely or unexpectedly in certain situations. Now, to get fully into this would be a completely different video. A video that I hope to make someday, but I have too many ideas, and also look at this mega doc. So for now, how about I do something a bit more manageable? Having a pretty good amount of confidence that I have at least tried every single item of the game once at this point, I must admit I didn't actually get out the list and double check every single one, so maybe on a couple of them I'm Mandela affecting myself into thinking I use them in a real game, but actually I only use them in the practice range. Maybe that'll be the case for one or two items, but as far as I can think, I believe I have used every item in the game at least once. And that's really difficult. Do you know how long a game of Stadium is? And do you know how many items aren't really easy picks at the start of a game? Now that I have all this experience, I gotta do something with it. So here are my picks for the 15 worst items in Stadium.
Hey, sorry to do this to you. Quick interruption. I have a bit of a technical issue with this video where the little gameplay panel that you're gonna see at different points throughout the video, like this, all spoilers. This little gameplay panel occasionally has moments where it sort of very slowly flickers. It goes darker for a second and then goes back to normal. I think it's something to do with the little fractal pattern I put on it. I think something about the transition that's supposed to make it loop broke. So now every time it loops, it goes dark for a second. It did not do that before I rendered it out, and now it's doing it. Now I would usually fix this. However, it took 90 minutes for it to render, and it nearly killed my PC. This entire video has nearly killed my PC making it. So, I kind of don't want to do that. I also don't even know what the problem is, and as I say, it didn't even show up until I rendered it, so I don't even know if I will be able to figure it out. So, I might have to leave that in, which kind of sucks, because as you might have been able to tell, I wanted to get this video very polished. Apologies for that. Otherwise, enjoy. Actually, I've already lied to you. We're not covering 15 items in this video, we're covering 25. It's just the first 10 I'm going to talk about aren't officially part of the list. And that's more because I want to use these items as examples of things that won't be on the list, even if they're the kind of things you might expect to belong on a bottom 15 list. First up are the niche items, which, to be fair, maybe I should be more specific. The very niche items. You see, I think the number one thing that makes a ranking list for Stadium items so difficult is the fact that nicheness is everywhere in Stadium. Nicheness isn't a novelty. It isn't that the standard is there's a bunch of items that are just generally applicable, but then there's a couple that are perfect in the right situation, but only in a few situations. No, almost every item in Stadium is made for a niche. There's barely any items that aren't made for a niche. And that means that it's harder to evaluate how good a niche item is. Usually, you can kind of just tend towards the middle. Take into account that it's really good in the right situation, take into account that that's not every situation, kind of put it somewhere in the middle. Maybe there's a bit of nuance there in terms of is it more important to be consistent in this game, or is it more important to be able to pop off, even if not all the time? That can sometimes tip it one way or the other. But in Stadium, nicheness is just so standard, it's so everywhere in the selection of items, that it's kind of hard to judge how many points you should give for something being niche. However, I felt like there was one other thing as well that made it really difficult that I just couldn't put my finger on for a while. And then it hit me. There are lots of items in Stadium that on a gut level feel like they should be bad to me, but then I use them really frequently and get a lot of use out of them. Because of the fact that being able to sell back all of your items for 100% of their cost whenever you like basically encourages you to always use niche items. I mean, if you have a massive pool of items that are stupidly strong in the right circumstances, but have narrow use cases, but there are thousands of different items that all fit different narrow use cases that you can buy at any moment, and if at any other moment you don't want them anymore, you can just sell them and buy another one with absolutely zero penalty. That kind of encourages you to just constantly rebuild your build, constantly adapt the items that you have to fit the niches you keep running into. So basically what I'm saying here is I think I'm going to generally say that I think being niche is generally good in Stadium. Assuming that you are, actually good at the job that you're supposed to do when you find your niche.
Considering that being niche is kind of a standard, and that if you do need to be picked and then later dropped, there's no consequence to that, I am not going to be too harsh on items for being niche. And so already that means there's a lot of items that you genuinely may have never used if you're a more casual player that you'd expect to be on this list that I actually think do not belong on this list. Because at the end of the day, when you use them in the right situations, they're actually some of the best items in the game. 3 great examples of this are electrolytes, field rations, and vanadium injection. Electrolytes gives you 100 overhealth at the start of every life, which means that as long as you are playing a character that doesn't take poke damage before your first 1v1, and then you take a 1v1 in the backline, this makes it super easy to build momentum. Especially if you're a character that can capitalize on momentum hard, like Genji, I genuinely think Electrolytes is the most busted health item in the game for characters like that. Because yes, it may only help you on your first fight, however, if you win your first fight as Genji, that usually snowballs into an entire fight win. If you manage to take out the support, or you manage to take out the hit scan, and then get a dash reset, and then take someone else out, and then get a dash reset, and take someone else out, and just snowball until you got the whole team dead, you're going to be really happy you took that 100 HP just for the first fight, where that was going to be the hardest because you had no momentum, rather than taking a 25 HP boost for all fights, but then not being able to even win one. Field Rations also provides you a small self-heal while you're standing on point, but it's only 8 HP per second. So if you're playing any kind of character that isn't camping on point, then generally this item isn't worth it. Even for characters that do camp on point, if you don't have a lot of damage resistance mechanics, it's still not worth it. However, when you have both, this is a really, really good item for someone like Orisa. If you can use damage resistance to basically double the effectiveness of the self-heal, and then also just camp on point all game and not have that be a detriment to your character, then this is actually a really powerful item. Finally, there's Vanadium Injection, an item that I used to think was much worse than I do right now because of the way I was trying to use it. Vanadium Injection is an item that gives you a bit of a buff in basically every single stat in the game if you have your ultimate but aren't using it. And so naturally, what was the first thing I did? I tried to use it with characters that had okay ultimates but not the best, and see if the stat boost was worth not using the ultimate. But what I found was generally, it was just better to use the ultimate even if it wasn't the best than to try and get the stat boost. The stat boost just, while it was cost efficient, was not that impressive to say that you have to sacrifice something to get it. What I later found out though, was that depending on the build you go, sometimes your ultimate doesn't just become okay, it becomes, like, worse than not using your ultimate. And that's when you should use Vanadium Injection. When you actually have a situation where your character's ultimate is arguably weaker than their normal state. And that might sound like it would be never, but it's actually more common than you may think. In particular, if you're doing a Weapon Power Moira or Weapon Power Reaper build, those are great examples of ultimates that actually become worse than your normal weapons. Because of the fact that with Weapon Power you don't buff your ultimate, and both Death Blossom and Coalescence need to be able to kill fast to have any uses. However, if you never buff them, by the late game they are literally going to be weaker than your normal weapons. So it will actually be a nerf to yourself to ever use your ultimate, so you may as well use Vanadium Injection. Now of course, this is not going to be very frequent, but when it happens, it is just one of the most cost-efficient upgrades in the game, so you may as well get it. Alternatively, there are the Desperation Items, 4 of which I can think of. There's the Ultimate Generation items, Winning Attitude and Junker Watchamajig. Winning Attitude gives you 15% ult charge when you die, and Junker Watchamajig gives you 25% ult charge to start the match, however it never gives you any more. Both of these items are terribly cost inefficient and not very impressive, but at the end of the day, if you are going to lose a match because you're not going to get your ultimate before the end of the round, you kind of got to buy them. These are definitely not as good as the items that are really good in their niche, but are just narrow in use case in my opinion, but I still think these barely dodge the list, because as much as I don't like these Desperation items, as much as I wish I never had to pick them, I also think if they didn't exist, there would be a lot of games you would just lose. Another couple examples of Desperation items that are more specific would be Geneticist Vial and Bloodbound. Bloodbound makes it so that the last person who killed you is revealed at all times and deals 10% less damage to you, but you deal 10% more damage to them. In my opinion, you should basically only take this item if one guy is rolling the entire lobby, but hey, if you're losing because one guy is rolling the entire lobby, take it, and take him out. Similarly, Geneticist Vial is a pretty bad deal overall. It's a very expensive item that only gives you a small health boost and the ability to resurrect once per round on your first death. In terms of making yourself stronger, Geneticist Vial is always the wrong pick. However, if you are at a point in the game where you feel like your character is strong enough, the only way you're going to lose a round is if you get picked first by something really unlucky, then obviously Geneticist Vial is basically the only thing you can do to prevent that. Like, say you're a support, and if you die, the entire team fight is lost, and you just need to win the first team fight to be able to win this round, realistically speaking. And let's say you're already strong enough that you don't really need much else. You may take Geneticist File because you're scared of the enemy Ash just going dink dink and getting a couple lucky headshots and just deleting your health bar no matter how many survivability items you take. And if that does happen to you and you took any other item, you may have been a stronger character, but you'd still just be dead, and you still may lose the round because you lost that first team fight due to a couple lucky shots from the enemy. Whereas if you take Geneticist File, obviously you just get back up, get back in the fight, and then you win the first team fight. But yeah, generally I think you have to already be set to want to take Geneticist Vial, and it's just supposed to be a contingency for an unlucky death at the start of a match when you really got to be alive for the first team fight. That just leaves 3 more items I want to cover before we get into this list, and these are just dishonorable mentions really. They don't really belong to a specific category, they're just here because I had 3 extra ones that fell off the bottom of the list. First up we got Techno Leech, probably the most boring item I'm going to cover in this video. 5% weapon power and 10% weapon lifesteal for 4,500 credits. It's just here because while there's plenty of items like this has got to be the most cost-inefficient item in the entire game. And yes, I know, it is intentional that trying to combine already existing items makes them into a more expensive item that is less cost-efficient, for the benefit that it takes up less item slots. However, Techno Leech is just egregious with this. Most other items don't go much worse than double the original cost. Techno Leech goes over double the original cost of just taking 2 separate items to get the exact same effect, so I just think it's an absolutely terrible deal. Next up for the dishonorable mentions, we got R Bikes, a Kiriko exclusive ability item that just barely dodged the list because while its effect I do think is garbage, its stat boosts are pretty good. All it does is provide an AoE heal during Kitsune Rush, which I think is completely unnecessary considering how strong Kitsune Rush already is, and the fact that you probably have rapid fire Suzus and Ofudas right now, so you don't really need any more healing. That being said, in theory, it could be useful if the second you Kitsune you die and you need the Kitsune Rush to heal people rather than yourself, although I think that's going to be pretty rare. And in fairness, the stat boosts that come bundled with this item are just pretty good. 25 HP and 15 AP is on the upper end of the kind of things you would get for an epic ability item in the shop, so getting both of those with this benefit at least makes this item seem a little better, though I still gotta say I don't think I would ever take it. Lastly is an item that I genuinely think very much belonged on the bottom 15, however it got buffed while I was making this video in the mid-season, and now I think it's okay. I still wouldn't recommend it, but I don't think it belongs on the bottom 15. That being Unscoped Resources, an Ana-specific weapon item that is epic, and essentially all it used to do was grant a small boost to your maximum ammo and the ability that every unscoped shot had a 50% chance to not consume any ammo. This obviously sucks. Ana already has more than enough ammo for the vast majority of situations, so getting more is not a significant buff. Consuming less ammo is also not a significant buff, and especially not consuming less ammo only when unscoped and only 50% of the time at complete random. I'm not saying that random effects are always bad in this mode, but at least if it's a random effect, it's got to have something pretty important attached to it for it to feel worthwhile. Like Junkrat's power where he sometimes fires 2 bombs is obviously pretty strong, because double bombs is insane, even if it doesn't feel great having to rely on random chance for it. Whereas with Ana, the fact that you're relying on random chance just to get 1 extra bullet every now and then does feel pretty bad. So why is this not on the bottom 15? Well, they give it a pretty basic but pretty significant buff, plus 15% weapon power, which might not sound like a lot, but actually the highest weapon power boost you can get in a single item in the game is 25%, and that's for a 14,000 cost item, one of the most expensive items in the game. So plus 15% for 10,000 plus an ammo boost. I mean, I'm not saying it's the best item, but it's actually pretty reasonable just in terms of pure stats, even if I still think the ability is kind of dumb. Either way, that covers the 10 items before we get into the proper list. Now comes the real issues. The real bottom 15 worst items in all of Stadium. Starting off the list at the number 15 spot, we have running shoes. An item that, unlike basically everything else you're going to see on this list, I actually do use semi-regularly. That being said, it's never an item I'm happy to use. It's a desperation pick. And while a lot of desperation picks dodge this list because of the fact that at the end of the day, while you're never happy to take them, if you didn't take them, you'll probably lose a lot of these rounds. This item is very rarely actually going to be the difference maker between winning or losing a round. The only reason why it is on the better end of the list is that it is a desperation item that you're usually buying because it's better than nothing. But it isn't a lot better than nothing. If it wasn't being compared to nothing in most situations, it really wouldn't see much use. For 1000 credits, Running Shoes gives you a 10 HP boost and the ability to get a 20% speed boost when you leave the spawn room until you next engage in combat. The 20% speed boost aspect of this is basically kinda useless on everyone except Kiriko or Mercy to get a TP or a Guardian Angel off. Other than that, I don't recommend it. You can only get good value off of it if you're constantly dying and coming back from spawn, but if you're constantly dying and coming back from spawn, then you're already throwing the game, so like, you know, don't do that. For the most part, the reason you buy this item is because it's 10 HP for 1000 credits, when every other health item costs 1500 credits. Which just means, hey, if you don't have 1500 credits and there's no way you can refactor your items to afford a better health item, then fine. 10 health is better than no health. But you might be confused. Why would you want the 1500 cost once? Well, if you do the maths, WoW is running shoes really inefficient. Okay, let me put it this way. If you take Armored Vest, then armor provides damage mitigation. Now, we're not going to get into the hullabaloo of how armor works specifically in this video because it'll take too long. But just so you know, the worst case scenario for Armored Vest, if armor gets the least value possible, it still equates to 32 effective HP, even though it's only 25 health in the health bar. So what that means is, you can either pay 1,500 credits to get 32 effective HP, or you could pay 1,000 credits to get 10. Quite literally, in terms of money in to health out, you are getting more than double the value just for paying 500 extra credits. That's also not to mention that usually the extra benefit you get with these other health items is usually a lot more impactful than the one that Running Shoes provides. So yes, Running Shoes is a terrible item. But at the end of the day, it at least goes at the top of this list because of the fact that so often you're still going to get it because there is literally nothing better you can get. Now I say that, even then, a lot of the times, even if what you want is health, you'll just suck it up and take weapon power or ability power instead, because the impact of that is so much more significant, even if you care more about survivability. In my case, oftentimes I will dodge getting this item by instead taking weapon lifesteal, even if I don't plan to DPS very much on my character. But every now and then I will just hit a situation where realistically I won't even get anything off of weapon lifesteal. Whether it be because I'm just playing a very passive character, whether it be because the enemy tank is someone like a Sigma who's just going to block off all the damage and I'm not going to be able to get consistent lifesteal, sometimes you have to take this item. But you're never happy that you're taking it. So it goes at number 15. You know, as sad as it is for the content of the video, it's quite difficult to have controversial placements in a list like this, I gotta admit. Because of the fact that, I mean, most of the items that are going to be maybe unexpectedly bad when most people think they're good are probably going to be items that only a small contingent of people really pay attention to anyway. Any of the items that literally everyone knows about, there's a reason everyone knows about them. They're just very generically applicable to just about every situation and just plain good. However, this might be the best I can muster. Our number 14 spot, I think might be the one I get the most pushback on for this video, but I think it deserves this spot. And I'll be quite honest, the reason why is because I realized it was one of the only items that I'd barely used left in the menu. And I was like, oh yeah, I can't believe I haven't used this item much. I've heard this item's pretty good if you know how to use it properly. And so I basically spent a day going out of my way to lab this item. Both how it interacted with abilities, the weird quirks of its logic, and on top of that, the kind of builds I might use it in. And what I learned is, good God, is this item way worse than it sounds. Enough drum roll though. Our number 14 spot goes to Biotech Maximizer. An item that I'm sure some people will want to defend the honor of, but an item that after giving it thorough testing and all the chances in the world, I am convinced is basically never better than another ability item called Iridescent Iris. So let's explain these two items. Biotech Maximizer provides a 10% AP boost and a 25 HP boost for 10,000 credits, alongside the bonus ability that whenever you use a cooldown that applies healing to an ally, for each different individual ally that gets healed by that one cooldown, that cooldown specifically receives a 5% reduction to its cooldown time. The item that I'm going to compare this to is not a one-to-one, but I think it is an item that in almost all cases outclasses it. Iridescent Iris is a 11,000 cost ability item that provides 20% AP, literally double the amount, and a permanent 10% cooldown reduction with no strings attached or conditions to all cooldowns, not just your healing cooldowns. This all comes with a cherry on top that it gives you 100 overhealth when you ult, but that's not very important. What's important is, this is just a generically very good ability item I use in a lot of builds, because 20% AP and 10% cooldown reduction are both really good stats to have, especially on the same item. And the 100 overhealth on ult is usually just a small little luxury, but
but it's nice to have. There's almost no character where you don't care about that, except someone like Zenyatta. Iridescent Iris does cost 1,000 more credits, but other than that, it basically always outclasses Biotech Maximizer. And that might not seem obvious at first. I mean, sure, it gives more AP, but I mean, it doesn't give health. It costs a little more, and I mean, the elephant in the room, it only provides a 10% cooldown reduction, when Biotech Maximizer could provide up to a 25% cooldown reduction. That's a pretty big deal. That's more than double. It seems at first the main problem with Biotech Maximizer is just finding a character that wants to use it. And don't get me wrong, that is a problem. That really narrows down your options. I'm not gonna lie, it actually weirds me out that this item is accessible to all characters when so few characters in the roster can actually make any half-decent use of this item. This feels like it should be a Lucio exclusive item, because spoilers, Lucio is literally the only character in the game I think this item is anywhere near decent with, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So yes, there's not a lot of characters you can use this item with, but there's a second layer of nicheness I've already sort of gestured at that I think a lot of people underrate. You've actually got to be able to consistently heal multiple people with this cooldown. And when I say multiple, I don't just mean like 2 or 3. You are going to need to be consistently hitting 4 to 5 people, which is basically your entire team, every single time you use this cooldown to be able to get value off of this ability. Considering the fact that, like I said, this cooldown reduction only applies to your healing cooldowns, which is usually only one of your cooldowns as a support. So obviously there are going to be some edge cases, but for the most part, if you want to equal the value of an unconditional 10% cooldown reduction on all of your cooldowns, then you're going to have to make it so that you're at least getting a 20% cooldown on one of your cooldowns using the value from Biotech Maximizer to catch up. So let's go through this. First of all, let's just say, for the most part, do not use this item with any tank or DPS. You can trigger it if you've got a self-heal item, you can get a 5% reduction, and there are some edge cases where you can get 10% reductions, but for the most part, there's no one that can actually get a juicy reduction without being in the support role. The only exceptions being that Soldier can obviously get a juicy reduction in theory with Biotic Field, but that requires the entire team to stand in Soldier's field, and I mean, good luck with that. And the other one is Junker Queen, but not for what you think. I actually think that Junker Queen would be really good with this item if it worked with her commanding shout, but I tested it and it doesn't, for a very stupid reason. Because of the fact that commanding shout doesn't go on cooldown until the shout expires, but by the time the shout expires, the healing has stopped. It can't actually apply the cooldown reduction, because it doesn't remember that you actually healed with shout once it ends. In fact, this is not the only ability that has this issue. If you try and take the Wambulance with Mercy, although it would only provide a 5% cooldown reduction, if you wanted to do that, you actually don't get the cooldown reduction with Guardian Angel either, unless you cancel it early. If you super jump using Guardian Angel, it makes it so the ability is still considered to be in use while you're healing them, and so you don't get the cooldown reduction unless you cancel your Guardian Angel early. It's still possible to get a big cooldown reduction with Queen, but you have to do it through wounds and the power that shares wounds self-heal with nearby allies. And from what I've found, while there's promise to this build, I'm not convinced it's really, it's creative and it might be viable, but what I played, it is very, very awkward trying to get more than a 10% boost off of it. Even if it is theoretically possible, you can get the big 25% reduction. And in case you were curious, yes, if you take the bleed on shout power, you can reduce the cooldown of shout using that. However, only if you extend the duration of the bleed past the normal duration using the power that allows headshots to do that. So you've got to combo multiple powers together for this extremely obscure interaction with one specific item, and at this point, just stop. I know we're trying to get creative here and I love being creative, but stop trying to argue that this is a way to use this item. So yes, you get the point. Do not use this with anything other than supports, but then even within the support role, how many supports do you actually want to use this with? We covered Mercy, you don't want to use it with Mercy. Zenyatta can't even get cooldown reductions, so I guess none for him. Kiriko can technically do it with Suzu, however the splash radius is small enough that I don't really consider that to be practical. It could be decent if you combined it with the TP AoE heal, but I feel like the TP AoE heal is too small for you to get much more than a 5% reduction at best in most cases, so that's a rough one. And you might think you're onto something with Ananade, but you don't really use Ananade like that. Anyone who's played Ana for a decent amount of time will know that hitting a big fat anti is way more impactful than using Nade to heal. And I'm not saying you can't use nade to heal, but usually even when you are using nade to heal, you're healing 1, maybe 2 people. Again, just not worth it. You need to be hitting big 5-man nades for this to be worth it. I think you can use this item if you really want to with Juno Torpedoes, which I think is the weakest of the 3 options because it's actually way harder than you think to hit multiple allies with a single use of torpedo, especially considering the delay, especially considering that allies very rarely group up how you'd like. But you can use torpedoes, it can be good. Next up is Moira Heal Orbs, which maybe have some potential. I don't know though. I feel like that's not going to be consistent. Sometimes you're going to get big cooldown reductions, sometimes you're not, and sometimes the times you're not are going to really kick you down, and you might rather just have some consistency. And yeah, we've come full circle. This shows us that the only character in the entire game that I think can get consistent value from this item is Lucio. But hey, enough of me whining. Sure, it sucks that this item is technically usable on everyone, but literally the only character in the game you would ever want to use it on is Lucio. But, I mean, if it's really good on Lucio, does it really belong in the bottom 15? You see, this is the issue. It's not even that good on Lucio. Like, okay, don't get me wrong. It's not bad. A 25% cooldown reduction on Amp It Up is a pretty big deal. By the way, that's a bit of a logical inconsistency because Amp It Up is considered to be in use while you're healing people with it, and yet for whatever reason, it can receive the cooldown reduction even though every other ability that's in use while it heals cannot. This is complete speculation, but I can't help but shake the feeling the way this looks, that the game logic makes it so that this shouldn't work, but they hard-coded it to work specifically with Amp It Up, just because in fairness it would be weird if it didn't work with Amp It Up. Not realizing that there are a couple other abilities that by that logic it should work with that they've forgotten about, like Guardian Angel and like Commanding Shout. Oh god, this entry is going to go on forever. Okay, but yes, it's good with Amp It Up, right? With Lucio. Yes, if your entire team clumps and plays Death Ball, and if you are a heal bot Lucio, then it's good. Can you at least see why I feel like this is the one item that pushed my buttons a little too far with the nicheness? Like, don't get me wrong, I do agree it's strong in its niche, but its niche is, can only be used with one character effectively, requires a specific team comp, requires a specific build, and even arguably requires specific maps. If you've got a map with a lot more high ground, a lot more long sight lines, and you try to play Death Ball, you're gonna get destroyed. You're gonna have to split up more, you're gonna have to poke more, you're gonna have to play the game in other ways than just being a big angry Death Ball that runs it down mid. And if you can't be a Death Ball, that means that you can't actually get the maximum benefit from this on Lucio. So yeah, this is just nicheness on top of nicheness on top of nicheness, and it just hits a point where I feel like it hits a critical mass of I don't care that it's finally good when you find the perfect situation. I just think the perfect situation is not common enough. But yes, in the perfect situation, it's a pretty good item, I guess. It's not even that insane, but like it's pretty good. So yeah, number 14.
Next up at our number 13 spot is an item I have to admit was a bit of a last-minute addition to the list, that being Weapon Jammer, an epic weapon item that gives you the ability to get plus 10% weapon power, and whenever you damage an enemy, you will take away 10% of their attack speed for 2 seconds to grant yourself 10% attack speed. And this is an item I wasn't expecting to put on this list, even though it wasn't really my favorite. Despite the fact that I didn't use it much, I put it in the flex slot of a lot of my builds for a very long time, expecting that, hey, yeah, I haven't used it yet, but surely soon enough, I'm going to come across someone who's doing an attack speed build, and I'm going to want to take Weapon Jammer to ruin their day. I constantly fell into this false trap of seeing this as another one of those niche items that needs to be in the right situation to be good, but in the right situation, it's going to pop off. But I kind of had to have a moment before I started actually recording this video, where I looked back at this item and was like, how come I've had this item as an option in the flex slot for so many of my builds, and yet to this day, I've only used it once, and I was really underwhelmed by it. Like, I've had multiple chances to use it. I've sat there and thought about taking it so many times, and for whatever reason, despite the fact I never put it away in my mind as a bad item, I still never picked it. I still always found an item that would be better, even if its effect would trigger. And then I kind of realized what the problem was. Well, kind of two-part problem actually. First of all, I didn't take note of the fact that this ability does not stack. You can't continue to steal more than 10% attack speed, and so that means minus 10% plus 10% is the best you're going to get with this. which don't get me wrong, is still like a good deal. I mean, in theory, you can think of taking away 10 and giving 10 as being equal to getting 20% attack speed yourself. And obviously an item that gave 10% weapon damage and 20% attack speed would be a really good deal, obviously. I kept thinking that this item was bad because I just need to find the right situation for it, but at the end of the day, I was ignoring the fact that I was constantly finding the right situation for it, and still going, no, I don't want it, I want something better. It wasn't like I haven't been seeing tons of people that are using attack speed in their builds, and especially once I realized the effect didn't stack, obviously that meant that I didn't have to target someone with a massive attack speed build with tons of attack speed. Anyone who'd even taken 10% attack speed, I would get quote unquote big value off of, right? If I use Weapon Jammer. And hey, most people have at least 10% attack speed. That's like most builds out there. So it's clearly not an issue of not being able to find targets for this item. There are plenty of targets. I just still did not want to use it even when the targets were there, and I needed to acknowledge that fact. Why was it that I didn't want to use it? Well, first of all, while it is efficient, now knowing that it couldn't stack, it really isn't that more efficient than the competition. Like, it is more efficient, but only by a small margin. What makes it worse, though, is that it's more efficient assuming you trigger the ability. And I don't mean that in the if they have attack speed way, we've already talked about that, that's easy. The hard part is actually, you kind of have to shoot them first for this to actually even happen, and even then it only lasts 2 seconds. Which I know might sound like such a trivial, small thing, but here's the problem with that thinking. If you're fighting the tank, it's fine thinking. Oh yeah, you're probably going to land a shot on them pretty quickly, and the fight's going to keep going on for way longer than just the first shot, and that whole time you're going to have that upside. Versus a tank, it's pretty good. But versus literally anyone else, if you are playing a DPS and you are fighting either another DPS or a support, you're in a duel. The person who wins that duel is usually going to be the guy who lands the first shot. Not always, but sometimes. And if you're struggling to land the first shot, it doesn't just mean that you're on the back foot, it also means that you're not even getting the buff that this item provides until you land your first shot, which might be by the time that you're basically dead. So, yeah. And don't get me wrong, will minus 10% attack speed help you? Yeah. Will it save your life? Probably not. So yeah, as much as Weapon Jammer might seem like it's this niche item, you just need to use it in the right situation, the more I've had to think about, do I actually want to take this item? And the more times I've realized, even in the situations for it, my answer is, no, I think this is better. I'm starting to realize I've been duped by this item, and it's not this sort of, oh, you just have to find the right place to use me. It is just pretty bad and underwhelming, even in the right situation. Next up is Celestial Clip, an epic weapon item for Mercy, which has the following benefits: plus 10% weapon power, plus 33% ammo, and Caduceus Blaster has a 10% chance to fire an extra bullet that doesn't consume any additional ammo. So why is this at the number 12 spot? It might seem like it's pretty forgivable, pretty mundane at first, but I'm going to be completely honest, I just think it sucks. I think the best thing about this item is the 10% weapon power, and that's about it. You see, one of my main problems with this is that it's an ammo boost item for Mercy. I mean, I'm gonna dog on a lot of ammo boost items. Ammo boost items are good in the right context. Ammo boosts on Soldier or Cass, they're a big deal. Ammo boosts on anyone who can really get to shoot super fast and actually dump their clip, that's good. But when you have someone who doesn't exactly dump their clip fast, I don't really think ammo boosts make a lot of sense. As Mercy, if you are being a battle Mercy, the best way to do it is to heal for a bit, and then find a target who's vulnerable, jump over, dive them, get out that Glock, pang, 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 and then either get a quick kill and get out, or if you can't get the kill, get out ASAP. It's that simple. You're usually only in there for 2, 3, maybe 4 seconds, and then you're out, which means you don't even have enough time to empty your clip or get any benefit out of having more ammo. Now, of course, where this can be flipped on its head is when you pop Valkyrie. And yes, if you pop Valkyrie, then Celestial Clip might start to see some value. But, oh wait, you have infinite ammo in Valkyrie, so you don't need to reload at all. So why do you want the extra ammo? Now don't get me wrong, I do think that it is valid to say the reason you take this item is purely for the damage boost, you don't care about the ammo. Honestly, while obviously it's not the best deal, you could still make an argument that this is worth doing, considering that, technically speaking, I could go back on my word for a second here and say, well actually, for this kind of cost, you usually get 15% weapon power, a 15% buff to your damage. However, here you're getting 10% weapon power, plus the 10% chance to get double damage, which effectively equates to an extra 10% DPS boost, just in a more spiky, luck-based fashion. And on top of that, that luck-based DPS boost
is stacking multiplicatively with your already existing weapon power. Meaning if we do 1.1 times 1.1, we're getting a 21% boost to damage rather than just a 10% boost. And again, usually you'd only be getting a 15% damage boost around this cost bracket. So you could make an argument, hey wait, that's actually a pretty good DPS boost for that cost. And to be honest, I think this is the best argument for Celestial Clip, and the main reason it isn't lower on the list. Even still though, I'm not the biggest fan of it, considering you gotta remember most of your weapon power's mercy goes into healing. And those extra bullets from Caduceus Plaster, while they are effectively a 10% boost to your DPS, they aren't a 10% boost to your healing output, whereas weapon power is a boost to both. So yeah, I do not think Celestial Clip is a particularly good item, but at the end of the day, it at least goes higher up on the list, because in theory, on a pure DPS level, it's not a bad deal. It's just the ammo is useless, and it is very sketchy taking such a luck-based damage boost on a character that already spends so much of her time healing, even when you play a Battle Mercy playstyle. Next up, we got a similar item, but one that I think is much, much worse. Which is ironic, because it's on a character that in theory would be much, much better to have an item like this. That being Reaper. The item in question is his epic weapon item, Onslaught, which costs 10,000 credits for the benefit of giving you a 25% ammo boost, and the ability that every third shot of your shotgun fires both shotguns at once. Wow, that sounds really good. Oh, but the bonus shot on the third shot only provides a 20% damage boost because the second shot gets an 80% reduction to its damage. But hey, at least it doesn't take any ammo, right? Okay, let me explain why this is so bad. If you actually do the maths here, one extra shot of 80% reduced damage means a 20% damage boost, like I said. Then you divide that by 3 because it's only every third shot, and you end up with a 6.67% damage boost for 10,000 credits. That's not a lot. But hey, at least you got an ammo boost, right? And I mean, in fairness, while ammo tends to suck, on Reaper, that's actually a character that kind of does like having more ammo. But here's where Onslaught's grave gets made. Reaper already has a rare weapon item, which costs 4,000 credits, literally less than half the cost of Onslaught, that basically provides the same benefit and more for stupidly less cost. That being Spectral Slugs. An item that also provides a 25% ammo boost, the same amount, provides a 5% attack speed boost, meaning that the DPS boost from this item that costs less than half is almost identical to the DPS boost from an item that costs more than double. And on top of that, Spectral Slugs has the bonus ability of giving you an instant free reload every single time you shadow step. So in terms of effective ammo boost, it is way better than Onslaught. The only reason Onslaught even has a leg in this race is because, in fairness, the way that Onslaught provides its damage buff is something completely separate from attack speed or weapon speed. Once again, providing that sort of multiplicative stacking, meaning in theory, if you're using attack speed and weapon power, and then combining it with this third instance of multiplicative damage buffs, you could get more value than 6.67%. But considering it's only a 6.67% boost to begin with, the more value you're going to get is usually going to end up being a rounding error. Quite frankly, this would belong way lower on the list, but in fairness, there is one elephant in the room that I haven't brought up yet. That being, usually, I'll admit, the first shot in a fight when you're Reaper is usually the most important and the one that lands the most shells. And you can, if you like, do 2 normal shots to build up that third bonus shot with the 20% bonus damage and start the fight with the instant 20% burst. So even though in theory, in a sustained fight, it's only a 6.67% damage boost, in a bursty I appear behind you and kill you in 1-2 shots kind of deal, it is then more like a 20-10% damage boost, which is, you know, much, much better. Even still, it's not really impressive numbers for such an expensive item. I would definitely say that Onslaught needs some help. For our number 10 spot, we got an item that I kind of am saddened to have to rank so lowly. But I also don't think I can lie to you. You see, there are 2 items I kind of fell in love with conceptually, and so I was really, really interested in them at the start of Stadium. However, I quickly realized that both of these items are a little underwhelming. Though out of the 2, one of them ended up at least being a little better than the other. Those being the health conversion items. The one that ended up being better was, of course, Vital ET, the item that converts 100 of your health into armor and gives you an extra 10 armor on your health bar. However, the one that makes this list is its counterpart, Vishkar Condenser, an item that gives you 25 shields and converts an extra 100 of your normal HP into even more shields. So why is Vishkar Condenser on this list? It boils down to two reasons. One, the synergies are kind of questionable and niche, and two, without the synergies, this item is very underwhelming because shield health is nowhere near as valuable as armor health and everyone knows it. Like again, I'm gonna, for the sake of time, try and avoid getting into the armor spiel again. But long story short, while the damage resistance of armor varies, in a worst case scenario, as I say, it's just -7 per hit, and that might only be like a 10% reduction or even less. But in a best case scenario versus fast firing shots or shotguns or things like that, it is a 50% damage reduction. And another way you can think of that is, say you're in a matchup where people aren't very good against your armor and your armor's almost always hitting its maximum damage mitigation of 50%. That means that it is health that heals back twice as fast as you lose it. Which explains why armor is typically on tanks. Armor is really good on characters that get their health bar refilled constantly by being healed. Because again, you heal twice as fast as you lose it because of the damage mitigation. And of course, there's no healing mitigation on armor, so it's a one-way street. So yeah, it actually kind of makes sense, even if it's a little bit cheesy, to convert 100 of your HP into armor. But it doesn't make sense to convert 100 of it into shields in most cases. Because shields doesn't have any extra value. Nothing about shields makes it more rewarding to heal back. Arguably, it's less rewarding to heal back. But in fairness, maybe I'm looking at it wrong. I mean, like I said, armor is the health type that is designed for people who get healed a lot. So shields is the opposite, the health type designed for people who don't get healed a lot. So obviously it's not supposed to synergize with being healed. Well, fair enough. But there's a big problem with that. When shields was invented, it was because there was no health regeneration passive in Overwatch. You had to have shield health to have any health regeneration. And now we have health regeneration on every character in the game. And we have had it for quite a bit. And I mean, don't get me wrong, does shield still have like any purpose at all? I mean, I guess so. The passive health regeneration got nerfed recently, so it's now a 6-second delay before it kicks in for any non-support character. For supports, it's still 3 seconds. Shield health, on the other hand, regardless of what character you are, always takes 3 seconds to start regenerating. And it also depends on how big your health bar is to start, since the health regeneration from your passive does scale with how big your health bar is to some extent. But for the most part, shield health regeneration is faster than passive health regeneration, and on top of that, the two types of regeneration can stack. And when you have both going at once, of course that will refill your health bar faster. That being said, for the most part, if you have been out of a fight long enough to start regenerating shields for 3 full seconds taking no damage, that usually means you're out of the fight. And so you don't really have much of an urgency to heal faster or sooner. You just need to know that you're going to get healed without needing to find a support or a health pack. So yeah, I think I've mostly demonstrated the issue here, right? Shields on their own as a health type without talking about their interactions with armor or their interactions with specific shield synergies, just shields alone are kind of useless in modern Overwatch. There's just not enough downtime to actually get the regeneration to trigger consistently, unless you're in situations where there's so much downtime that you don't really care about the shields in the first place because you can just regen your health anyway. The sweet spot where you actually care about shields does exist, but it's so tiny and so insignificant that taking an entire item just to capitalize on it is stupidly questionable. But hey, I'm being very mean right now. What about if your build actually makes sense with getting more shields? Well, how would that happen? Well, first of all, you can hide armor under shields, and that is pretty good, because in fairness, the kind of damage that breaks through armor quickly is the kind of damage that are big, slow hits. And typically, big, slow hits, not always, but typically, come from long-range poke damage. And that's usually the kind of damage you take first before you enter the fight. So having shields on top of your armor is good because the shields can tank all the poke that would tear through your armor, so that your armor is still left over for when you get into the real up-close fight, and the actual up-close damage that the armor is typically better against doesn't get destroyed by the poke before you can approach. The other thing that can be good is that because it hides armor underneath your shields, you can use it to put armor health lower on your health bar, which is especially good when you combine it with Crusader Hydraulics, the item that gives you 10% damage resistance versus weapons, so long as you still have armor left on your health bar. Of course, it's better to just, get more armor with Vital ET, but I suppose in theory you could get both Vishkar Condenser and Vital ET to be extra safe. though that is a lot of credits to dump on just one synergy. More importantly though, I'm kind of ignoring the counterpart to Crusader Hydraulics, that being Titanium Shielding. This counterpart item provides 15% damage resistance versus abilities, but only while you have shield health left. It's typically much worse than Crusader Hydraulics because of the fact that, well, shields go on top of armor, and they're way easier to break, so it's harder to keep this one up. But in theory, if you had a character with a load of shields already to begin with, and then you get even more shields through items, this could be pretty good as well in the right situations. So like overall, it's not like there's no use for Vishkar Condenser, but I definitely wouldn't take it unless you're doing these synergies, and a lot of the times these synergies I'm talking about, they're nice to think about, but it's just a lot of resources to dump into something that isn't even going to be that impactful. Like, don't get me wrong, 15% ability damage resistance is not bad, especially if the enemy builds are all like AP builds anyway. But when you pay 3.75k for the initial titanium shielding, and then you pay 4,000 for Vishkar Condenser, and then you pay 4,000 for Vitality, and then you also pay another 4,500 for Crusader Hydraulics to get the maximum value from these overlapping synergies, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not bad, but like, it's a lot of money to dump into this. But lastly for Vishkar Condenser, what about Toki Slam? Toki Slam is a D.Va power that essentially got buffed just this mid-season patch that we recently had, and it essentially gives D.Va a ground pound attack while using boosters, and it used to be that the damage was based on how much armor you have. However, D.Va's always had a lot of items that allow her to gain more shield health for doing certain tasks, and so it only made sense that they buffed it to also include shield health in that calculation. So yes, you can use Vishkar Condenser with Toki Slam to increase the damage of it significantly. In fact, I think in particular, Vishkar Condenser provides a larger damage boost in a single item to Toki Slam than any other item in the game. So yeah, obviously if you're running a Toki Slam build, you're going to use it. Why doesn't that save it? I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Toki Slam is a complete meme. I have played with it and it felt pretty garbage at first, but I did feel like there was something to it. And I did feel like the longer the game goes, the better it gets. But definitely it wasn't blowing me away, and I don't think it's the best way to play D.Va. Unfortunately, that probably still goes to Rockets. As boring as they are just very overtuned right now. I know that's a lot, but I have a lot of thoughts about this item, and I want to do it justice. It's not awful. It's just any way you can make it useful, as creative and fun as it is, isn't very practical. And so I think I've got to put it at the number 10 spot.
Ever wondered what it looks like when they add an item to the armory that is an epic 10,000 credit survival item exclusive to only one character that is literally weaker than one of their minor perks in the base game? That's what you get when you have Aishi on Mei. An item that gives 25 HP, and the bonus that your Ice Wall's duration is increased by, get this, 1 second. Okay, it may also double the health of the ice pillars, but overall this item is a terrible deal. Because already, like I said, Mei has a minor, not even a major, a minor perk in the game as it is already, that literally no one on the planet uses and everyone recognizes as one of the worst perk options in the game, that is, that her wall gets 2 seconds of extra duration. So this is half as effective as a minor perk that already exists in the game that is also considered to be one of the worst minor perk options in the entire game. But in fairness, that isn't taking into account the fact that it also doubles the HP of the ice pillars. Is that useful? No. Okay, I'll be fair here. Most people will just say no and move on. I'm gonna say no, but maybe, but no. So hey, I'm giving them a fair shot. The but maybe is, in fairness, most people don't bother breaking Mei Wall. However, if you are not buffing the HP of your Mei Wall at all in Stadium, and you get to the late game, people's damage numbers go up so quickly they can actually break Mei Wall almost immediately in a lot of cases. In which case you could say, hey, I actually do care about the health of my wall, and I might take an item that doubles the health of the wall. That is a lot of extra HP that would make my walls way sturdier. So here's my two-part problem with that. First of all, that's assuming you're weapon power Mei, and you're not taking any ability power. If you take basically any ability power, then you can throw that thinking out the window. Ability power also increases the HP of the pillars on its own, and with the amount of extra HP you get from ability power, you really don't need to buff your wall anymore as Mei. AP Mei's walls are already effectively invincible, they don't need any more health.
So any Mei that has any somewhat decent amount of AP already literally never needs this item. But hey, what if you are weapon power Mei and you really need those walls and you don't have the AP to keep their health up? Maybe then you want Ice Sheet. And yes, I would agree that is the one situation in which I would ever take Ice Sheet. Even then, can we take a second to acknowledge we're spending 10,000 credits on this? 10,000 credits on getting 25 extra HP and the ability to maybe wall people in a teensy bit longer in situations where people probably weren't even trying to break the walls in the first place. For that much money, you could just get a massive boost to your DPS output, which would probably be more effective. Now that being said, at the end of the day, wall has utility, and utility that can't always be replaced by just getting more damage. And if this lets you wall in situations where otherwise you couldn't use wall, fair enough. It's not like literally never take, but it's just that use case seems so narrow, I still think this definitely belongs on the lower end of this list. Next up is an item that you might be surprised to see here. Frenzy Amplifier ends up being my pick for 8th worst item in Stadium. A common weapon item you should be familiar with because a lot of people buy it at the start of the game. It provides you with a 15% movement speed boost and a 10% attack speed boost for 3 seconds upon securing an elimination. That's good, right? Nah, I don't think it is. This is kind of the anti-electrolytes. Where electrolytes was a really unpopular item I stuck up for and said is actually really good on the right characters, because while it only provides a temporary benefit, that 100 extra health but only for your first fight, 100 health in the first fight is a really big bonus to have in that fight specifically, and while it won't carry over to the next fights, having that one fight be so in your favor means it's easy to build momentum. And it's really important to build momentum, to take angles, to get space off of the fights you win in Overwatch. It might not be a stat on the scoreboard, but you do get a permanent benefit from electrolytes if electrolytes enables you to win the first fight. Even if it's no longer giving you any HP, what it is giving you is space. On the other hand, Frenzy Amplifier is doing the opposite. It's trying to trick you into a greed trap, where technically in terms of money, it is a better deal. It is a lot more stats for a much cheaper cost than basically anything else here. But remember, it's only 3 seconds of it, it's only after you get a kill, and it's only once you're already winning. Now that doesn't mean that it's literally never going to see any use. I think the best use of it is to combine it with electrolytes to offset a lot of its downsides, because like I said, if the main problem with this item is it doesn't help you at the most important point in the game, trying to even build momentum in the first place, and turn a losing game or a neutral game into a winning one, then why not just use the item that literally exists to do that and nothing else, with the item that rewards you for building momentum? Makes sense. Even then though, like I said, while electrolytes is really good in its niche, it's a really niche item. So this is an item that essentially I think is basically a beginner trap for 99% of people, and the only time you genuinely want to take it is when you're already able to take another super niche item and then you want to combine it with this so that you can push your momentum harder when you win that first fight. It is very specific circumstances, and other than that I would basically never take this item. I would basically only take it with Moira and Genji combined with electrolytes, that's about it. Now, to kick off the bottom end of this list, the worst of the worst, we got Sunburst Serum. Which, to be fair, is actually maybe not so bad to say it's the beginning of the bottom half of this list. But what can I say, I still think it belongs here. Sunburst Serum is an item that is exclusive to Juno, it's an epic survival item, and for the cost of 10,000 credits, it will grant you 75 shields, and the ability that Orbital Ray will heal an extra 25% compared to normal. The special ability of this item is basically useless. And that might sound like, really? I mean, isn't Orbital Ray a lot of healing? And isn't a 25% boost a pretty big amount? And I guess the answer to that is yes. But then that does beg the follow-up question, when the hell is Orbital Ray's healing not enough? Maybe if you're getting partially anti-healed on a mass scale, maybe then. But for the most part, Orbital Ray provides more than enough healing, especially because every Juno under the sun invests in ability power, not weapon power. And ability power also amps the healing of your ultimate, which is already really high and basically a mini transcendence. So the only circumstance in which I think you would ever actually need the heal boost is if the enemies are using anti-heals, and on top of that, you are running weapon power Juno, and so you don't have the AP required to give the ultimate good healing, which is already really niche. If it was just that, it genuinely might be a bottom 5 in the entire game, but it's at least spared a bottom 5 spot by the fact that, in fairness, it grants 75 shields. 75 shields is actually a lot relative to the amount you usually get in Stadium. Most items, even late game items, only give 25, at most 50. In fact, I believe there are only 2 items in the game that give more health than this at once, one of which being an Ash exclusive survival item that increases the health of Bob and Ash herself, and the other one being Vanadium Injection, but even Vanadium Injection only gives 100 health when you have your ultimate, otherwise it only gives 50. So in fairness, in terms of just health added to your health bar, this is a lot, but overall, yeah, way too niche use case, and you still don't really want to be paying 10,000 credits for 75 shields, even if it is a bit of a novelty and there's not many other items that can do that. I'm kind of curious to see if people will find this placement agreeable or kind of shocking, because this item honestly probably doesn't seem that bad on first glance, but I'm going to be real with you, I think this item is awful. Mondata's Mantra, a Zenyatta exclusive ability item that's epic and requires 11,000 credits. Now don't get me wrong, Zen has access to a lot of stupid transcendence buffs in the form of items that I'm not really a big fan of. However, almost every single one dodges this list, because a lot of them, for as much as I might not like the boost they provide, actually do provide good stat boosts as well. It seems the devs are aware of the fact, okay, this transcendence buff is kind of quirky and funny, but let's be real, it sucks. You don't actually want it. So hey, we're going to sweeten the deal by giving you really good stats. Satch's solution is a great example of this. For 4,000 credits, that gives you the ability that your Transcendence's aura slowly grows in size the longer it continues. But I'm going to be real with you, that is near useless. It is pretty terrible. And so that would usually make it a terrible item in my view. But I actually like taking Satch's solution, because of the fact that it also comes bundled with 10% move speed and 10% AP, which is actually a really, really good deal for 4,000 credits. I know that 10% move speed might not sound like a lot, but it's extremely rare to get move speed boosts in Stadium. So getting a 10% boost for only 4,000 credits is actually a really good deal, especially with the AP boost bundled with it. But then there's Mondata's Mantra, the only transcendence buffing item that Zenyatta has access to that quite literally provides you 0 stat benefits. It is all in on the transcendence buff, and the transcendence buff it provides sucks. Well, I say buff, it's buffs. It provides 2 buffs. One of them is it increases the duration of transcendence by 30%, and the other one is once transcendence ends, you gain overhealth equal to all the healing that you did with transcendence. And don't get me wrong, could you probably generate thousands in overhealth using this item? Yeah, I believe it. But here are my 2 issues. Let's start with the overhealth one. Zenyatta has a stupid amount of tools for survivability. He can actually be unkillable in Stadium. My first game on Zenyatta, I literally held a point in overtime alone 1v5 for 3 minutes straight. Because I was just that unkillable. It wasn't even like, oh, I'm so cracked at the game. They just could not kill me because I'm Zen. And that wasn't using this item. That was just using damage resistance items, using self-heal, using, movement with the floating perk to be able to get to points where it's really hard to land shots on me. Zenyatta is already, in my opinion, the character more capable than anyone else in Stadium of making themselves actually unkillable. So I gotta ask, why would you not just go self-heal AP Zenyatta, make yourself a build where you get to be a massive, extremely powerful healer that's also basically unkillable, and have that be the case at all times? Because if you take Mondata's Mantra, you can be unkillable after you use your ult, but then you're killable again, which means you're just gonna die when the overhealth is gone. Whereas if you actually just made a competent Zen build, you could be unkillable at all times, and even get ult charge for taking damage but not dying because you're healing yourself, and yes, the self-heal does give ult charge. That means the only thing that could really save Mondata's Mantra is the Transcendence duration, and I do think that's the only valid reason to pick it, but even then, do you really need more Transcendence duration? I mean, one of Zen's better powers is the Transcendence cancelling power, because of the fact that usually you get 90% of the value of Transcendence in the first second of it, so being able to cancel it early and keep some of your ult charge is extremely valuable. I think the strength of that power kind of demonstrates why more Transcendence duration is kind of a dumb idea. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm sure you can contrive a situation in which it's a game changer, but in most cases, you're actually going to get all the value you need out of Transcendence from the first second or two of it being active. You don't need it to be active for that long. So yeah, I just think Mondata's Mantra is a really, really poor pick. I know that there's going to be some kind of builds with it, there's going to be some kind of synergies where people are going to say, oh, but it's really, really cool here. But I just think, at best, it's going to be a really greedy pop-off item that leaves your character absolutely gutted and useless whenever it's not being used. and it's going to have really poor uptime. Come on, you knew it was coming. If anything, you might be surprised it's not in the bottom 2 or whatever, but I think this item's at least a little bit overhated, but yeah. There is one item that I feel like has almost become the face of dumb stadium items, and that is, of course, our number 5 pick, Cold Spot for May. Cold Spot is a rare survival item exclusive to May that costs 4,000 credits, provides 25 health, but its main benefit is that it allows you to put out fires, either by using your primary fire's snow spray or by standing inside a blizzard. Now, like I said, you might have been expecting this would be one of the worst items in the entire game, like literally the worst or maybe second worst. And here it is at number 5, which isn't very good at all, but like maybe was still better than you were expecting. And there's a reason for that. I actually don't think the problem with this item is that it's too niche to put people out of being on fire. I think it has a different problem that goes overlooked. But first of all, let's explain why I think it is actually, in fairness, pretty valuable to put people out of being on fire. At first glance, it might look like the only character in the game that can set people on fire is Ashe, because she's the only one who can do it with her base kit. However, when you expand that to include powers and items, there are actually a lot of characters in Stadium that can set people on fire. Junkrat's most popular power, Bango, allows him to do 20% extra damage with his primary fire as burn damage whenever he lands a direct hit with one of his bombs, and it's used all the time. He also has an item which allows his trap to set people on fire for an extra 75 damage a second when they get caught on it, which can very well be the difference maker that could kill them. Reinhardt has a power called Feel the Burn that's also pretty popular, where every third hammer swing he sets people on fire. Orisa has an item called Scorched Earth, where whenever she overheats, anyone near her at all just gets set on fire and burns, taking damage relative to her HP pool. There are plenty of things you can run into in Stadium that deal significant enough burn damage that Cold Spot in theory could be worth taking. And I mean, let's not forget the obvious one, AP Ashe. It's a pretty popular build. And don't get me wrong, I do admit I think that AP Ashe is a little overrated and a little overused, but I mean, it's popular and it's clearly viable at the very least. And with the amount of burn damage that an AP Ashe does, like seriously, you can have a full HP bar of like 600 HP, but if she catches you with that dynamite coach gun combo, you will literally watch as the burn damage melts your entire HP bar from full health. You know, being able to negate literal hundreds worth of damage by taking a 4,000 cost survival item, in theory, damn, that's like good. I think the thing that goes overlooked about this item that actually makes it bad isn't the fact that putting things out of fire is a bad idea. I think it's actually a great idea for a niche Stadium item. I think the real problem is the way you do it. I mean, I can't complain too much, it makes logical sense, but in terms of being effective, yeesh. You see, you have to either spray someone with your primary fire, which doesn't have the longest range unless you take the power that extends it, or you have to put the person who is burning in a blizzard. So let's go through the problems here. First of all, what if you get set on fire? Like, you're the one who's taking this item. If you're in a game of randoms, chances are no one else knows that you have this item. No one else is paying attention. So they're probably not going to be the easiest to help with this item because they probably don't even know you have it. And if you try it and use it to heal them and protect them from the fire, they will probably just run away from you without even realizing that they're killing themselves. And it's not like you got great movement to chase them on May. So I mean, first things first, you're the one who bought this item. Can you actually use it to put fire out from yourself? Not with the spray, you gotta use a blizzard, and well, like, do you want to pop your entire ultimate just so you're not on fire anymore? That's like kind of pathetic. And no, don't worry. I know that your ultimate isn't the only way you can spawn a blizzard in Stadium. Mini blizzards also count, and mini blizzards can be spawned with your powers. There's still a bit of a problem with that though. The main way that people spawn mini blizzards is with cryo freeze, and cryo freeze already cleanses all negative effects upon usage. So if you wanted to put yourself out of fire using a cooldown, you could already use cryo freeze. But hey, there's still one more way you can do it. You could take the power where ice walls spawn a mini blizzard and stand in your own walls blizzard. And that is the one case where it's actually like, oh, thank God, I can finally put myself out of being on fire. But wall is also a pretty long cooldown. You're not really happy that you have to burn an entire wall just to unburn yourself. So I guess to make this worth it, you would have to constantly use it not only for yourself, but also for your allies. But that just makes things even worse. You know how randoms play in this game, and to be fair to them, like, how are they supposed to know that you have that item? Like, of course, they can press tab and they can check. And don't get me wrong, I'm a nerd. I do that frequently. Basically, every game I have, I don't just check what build I have, I check what my allies are running too. But like, I'm a nerd. Normal people don't do that. And to be honest, they probably shouldn't have to. So if they don't actually press tab, check your items, check that you have cold spot, and understand, oh wait, I'm supposed to go to you when I'm set on fire, then yeah, people aren't going to come to you when they're set on fire. They're probably just going to keep running into the fight and further away from you, and you're not going to be able to catch up because you're May. So yeah, I think I've hopefully made my point by now. It's a real shame because I actually think this would be a really useful item if it was just the kind of thing where, and in fairness, I don't know how you'd do this, but you just snap your fingers and it's done. You don't even have to use a cooldown, you get set on fire, you spray yourself somehow, I don't know, and you put yourself out immediately. An ally gets set on fire, maybe your right clicks can also put out the fire, that would be great. That way you could just tap them with an icicle and then boom, all the fire's gone. There you go. In the meantime, this isn't really part of the list, but just a little tidbit I can't help but throw in here. There's an item that all characters are allowed to use that is pretty damn cheap, that applies a 40% reduction to the duration of all negative effects, including DOTs. This of course being cushion padding. This is probably an item that you've already glanced at before, but you probably misinterpreted it as something that's only good versus stuns, because it specifically says when you get stunned, hindered, or slept, it heals for 10% of your HP. This leads to people understandably falling into the trap of thinking this item is only to be taken versus sleeps, hinders, or stuns. But no, that 40% reduced duration also applies to all damage over times, making it pretty damn good against Ash Dynamite, and especially good versus Queen's Wounds, as it not only makes it so that you take less damage, but it also means the Queen gets less self-heal as a result. Being able to reduce the DOT damage of the entire enemy team by 40% for only 3,750 credits, as well as getting CC resistance, as well as getting an extra 25 shields, is a pretty damn good deal. I know, a little off topic, but just had to throw it in there since we're talking about burn and all that. So if you want some good counterplay to burn, especially if you're not playing Mei, there you go.
Next up is an item that I'm honestly kind of sad to have to put here. I feel betrayed by this item because I actually like it conceptually, but I gotta say, I just think in execution it's awful. That item being BioLite Overflow, the item that grants you 25 extra health, plus 5% of AP, and the ability to grant 75 overhealth to nearby allies when you use your ultimate. Alright, let me explain the problem here. So, I'm a big fan of ult spam builds, especially because unfortunately, I expected that the charge plating item that gives you 25 armor and 10 AP when you use your ultimate would continue to give you more stacks the more ultimates you used. I later learned unfortunately it does not stack, which really shot down my ambitions, but I still made a lot of ult spam builds that even without it stacking, I still thought were pretty powerful. And in theory, I would love to use BioLite Overflow in a lot of those builds. I mean, if I'm not getting a stacking benefit from charge plating, I can at least constantly re-trigger the benefit of BioLite Overflow, right? I really do like the idea of adding items to Stadium that essentially can add abilities onto your ultimates, so that no matter what character you are, you can give your ultimate value in ways that it couldn't have before. I kind of like the idea of having this item that, let's just sell the fantasy right now, let's pretend it doesn't suck for a moment. I like the idea of having this item that you pop your ultimate, and rather than it just giving all the benefit to you, because the ultimate base is probably already going to do that, it tells the rest of your teammates, hey look, there's the health, there's the speed, get in there, come on with me, I'm going in, I'm giving you some health, you can get in there with me, let's go, this is your big like commanding shout, it's your rallying roar, you're going in there. But let's compare this sort of figurative commanding shout to actual commanding shout that Junker Queen has. Because I think if you literally had commanding shout's effect on an ultimate, that'd be a really good item, both over health and a speed boost to all allies near you. But let's talk about why it doesn't work out like that. First of all, there's the elephant in the room. Commanding shout gives speed, this does not. I really gotta ask, why does BioLite Overflow not grant speed? Because one character in particular I kind of conceptually like the idea of this with is Genji. When you pop Dragon Blade as Genji, the most annoying thing is when your team just watches you go in awkwardly and watches you get fucked, instead of, you know, getting involved, trying to help you, trying to help out. And so if when you pop Dragon Blade, everyone got speed and health, it would be like, oh god, we're going in. Everyone runs in and actually helps you because they've got the signal. They got everything they need to push up and be a bit more aggressive. But
As you can guess, even with the overhealth that BioLite Overflow provides, a lot of the times, because they don't get the speed, your teammates still don't really get in there if you pop Dragon Blade with BioLite Overflow. Because even if they have the health now, most characters still aren't going to have the movement to be able to follow you in there. They're just going to have to watch and hope that you're okay. As well as that, the amount of overhealth that BioLite Overflow gives is not even that much to say that this is for using an ultimate. I mean, don't get me wrong, 75 is nothing to sniff at, and if you are in like an enemy backline taking a big duel and you can give an ally of yours 75 overhealth, that's a big deal. But I mean, if you're 2v1ing in a backline already, you probably don't need your ultimate, and 75 overhealth on top of an ultimate is probably not going to make a big difference. The worst part is, I would still take BioLite Overflow no matter how bad that goddamn buff was on some of these ult spam builds, if they actually made any sense to use with these ultimates. But that's just the saddest part. I feel like most characters who have ultimates, you can realistically get to a point where you can spam them frequently enough that you might actually want to use BioLite Overflow, also have ultimates for which there is no reason to use BioLite Overflow. For example, in Stadium right now, I find the most spammable ult in the entire game is Zenyatta's Transcendence. If you take the item where you get more ult charge for ability-based healing, go all in on AP, and take the Transcendence cancel ability, you can get like 5 or 6 Transcendences around. And so combining that with BioLite Overflow would be sick. Except why the hell would you need overhealth when your ultimate already grants practical invincibility? Okay, but it's not just Zen, you could use it on another kind of character you can ult spam with. What about Orisa? And Orisa I had a bit more hope for, but I found in practice a lot of times, because you play the objective so hard as Orisa, and because your DPS usually want to off-angle, and because your supports usually want to sit back at a safer position and just pump heals into you from behind, no one's actually with you when you pop your ultimate. I mean, they're with you in the fact that they are in the fight, they are relevant to the fight, they are doing things, but they're not close enough to actually get the BioLite Overflow buff. And that's not even like because they're stupid, that's because the characters they're playing don't want to play from the position you're playing. Only other tanks would want to play where you're playing, but there's only one tank in this mode, so no one else is going to be playing where you are. I just keep finding problems like this every single time. I'm like, today I'll use BioLite Overflow. And considering the stat boosts it provides other than its benefit are so underwhelming, that just makes for one of the worst items in the game. I really hate to say it because I wanted to believe there was potential in this item, but after having given it a good chance, I think BioLite Overflow is my pick for 4th worst item in all of Stadium. Next up, I'll admit, I'm gonna cheat just a tiny bit. You see, for the number 3 spot, I'm putting 2 items. However, the reason I'm putting them together is they're both bad for basically the same reasons. Now, in fairness, one of these items is nowhere near as bad as 3rd worst item in the game, but if I didn't include it in this spot, it would probably just be somewhere in this list like number 10 or 11, and it would feel kind of like having a duplicate slot that just was kind of useless. Enough being around the bush though. These 2 items are Blackwatch Tech and Wanted Poster for Cassidy. These are both Deadeye synergy items. Blackwatch Tech is the item that grants you plus 10% AP for 4,000 credits, and the ability that for every single kill you get with Deadeye, for the rest of the game, your flashbang has a 10% reduced cooldown. On the other hand, Wanted Poster provides you with 25 extra health, and the ability that whenever you get a kill with Deadeye, you get 500 Stadium cash. Of these 2, Wanted Poster actually isn't that bad. Like, I don't think it's good, but I think I've seen worse. I would have to think about it. Maybe Wanted Poster wouldn't even make my bottom 15, but it would definitely at least be a dishonorable mention, so I had to throw it in here somewhere. That being said, Blackwatch Tech is the true number 3 spot. So let's get the obvious out of the way. Deadeye build, lol. But like, no, seriously, I'm actually going to be reasonable for a moment. I've been trying to make Deadeye builds work as Cass, and I've found interesting findings. I don't actually think Deadeye Cass is a weak build in theory. I think the problem is that you have like no path to get there. Like, if you could just appear in round 7 and set up whatever you build you like, I think you could genuinely make Deadeye Cass a menace. But realistically speaking, the rounds before the last couple rounds in the game still exist, and a lot of games in fact end on round 4. And I do think that Deadeye Cass builds are kind of garbage until the ultra late game. That being said, if you make it to the ultra late game, I do think they're actually really strong. If you invest in AP, Deadeye kills stupid fast and it's basically unavoidable. If you combine that with the powers that allow you to get move speed during Deadeye, get overhealth during Deadeye so you can just like walk into wherever you want without dying, get slows when you look at people with Deadeye, it can be impossible to avoid this ult. It can genuinely suddenly become a nuke that just takes entire teams out effortlessly, even if they play well. It's just, your character itself sucks all the time you don't have Deadeye, which is 90% of the match. And it's really, really hard to invest in things that give your ultimate faster as Cass when you have barely any sources of ability-based damage or healing, and the best item in the game to get you your ultimate faster is an item that only applies to ability-based damage and healing. So yeah, I'm talking a lot about the Deadeye build in general because obviously it's pretty fundamental to whether these items are good or not. Because the Deadeye build is kind of a meme, obviously that means they're bad. But I at least want to give some credit to Wanted Poster. What Wanted Poster does better is that the benefit it provides isn't for the round, it's permanent. It's credits you can use for every round going forward. Black Watch Tech is much worse because quite frankly, when you use Deadeye is likely to be towards the last third of a round. So at best, let's say you get 2 kills with Deadeye, which is pretty optimistic, honestly. You get 2 kills with Deadeye, you get your Deadeye 2/3 of the way through the round. Don't get me wrong, 20% cooldown reduction on your flashbang, pretty big deal. But 20% cooldown reduction on your flashbang only for the last third of the game, and also only if you hit a lucky Deadeye is like, it's not the best. I feel like a lot of the Deadeye package would make a lot more sense if you could just get to a point with Cass where you can still take Deadeye synergy items, but also realistically build multiple Deadeyes in a single match. I just feel like that's the main problem. I don't usually get more than at most 2 Deadeyes a match, and usually if I can even get 2, the second one is like right at the end. But if I'm only getting 2 Deadeyes a match, and if all my eggs are just in the Deadeye basket, then it's really, really hard to actually get value off of it. But in terms of the actual power of the ultimate, I do think you can make it a very strong ultimate. I just think, like, the character itself has to function while you don't have the ultimate. As I say, that's why Wanted Poster is at least a little better, because the main issue is even getting the credits to be able to get all the Deadeye synergy, but then also have a decent character. And hey, this gives you credits, and that benefit isn't just something that goes away the next round, that's permanent. But Black Watch Tech is just so much worse in that it provides you AP on a character that does almost nothing with AP, and that it provides you a benefit that only applies for like a minute before it goes away, never to be seen again. Can I be honest with you? I kinda hate that they gave D.Va so many self-destruct synergy items, when self-destruct D.Va is such a cheesy, stupid, annoying build. It's so bad, man. That's not gonna stop people from trying it. But at the very least, while there are a lot of self-destruct synergies that I don't approve of as a whole, but I'll admit, hey, you know what, as far as self-destruct powers go, that's pretty good. Like, I didn't think that 15% faster detonation time really sounded very good when I read that power, but while I still don't take the power, having seen it in action, that 15% reduction really does bamboozle people, and is actually pretty valuable if you're forced to take a self-destruct D.Va build. And hey, as well as that, there's also the power that lets you have a massively increased explosion radius if the bomb blows up mid-air. That's very disorientating and confusing for people, and it allows a lot of other bombs to catch people off guard. So yeah, there are self-destruct powers where, yes, the whole package as a whole might still suck, but ultimately, I can admit that while the package sucks, this is a good part of the package. But what happens when you have an item that isn't just for a package that sucks, but also isn't even a good aspect of the package that already sucks? That's when you get Vesuvius Protocol, an item that was initially my pick for #1 worst item in all of Stadia, but just barely dodged the depths. Thanks to the fact that I must admit, I hadn't even used this item in a real game, because you couldn't force me to at gunpoint. I wasn't about to get on there and throw a game and get everyone to flame me, because I'm playing Self-Destruct D.Va and I'm using Vesuvius Protocol. At least the other items are actually, like, good for the build. This one's just a throw pick, right? But I must admit there was one misconception. I assumed that this would drop lava where the bomb is, and the idiocy of that would be pretty obvious. Why would you want to put the lava where the bomb is when no one's going to be where the bomb is because the bomb's already going to kill them or they're going to run away? However, I did actually misunderstand. Unexpectedly, the lava doesn't appear where the bomb is. The lava appears where you are the second you hit your ultimate. So essentially, it appears where Baby D.Va lands when she jumps out of the mech. Why does this change things? Well, first of all, aside from the fact it puts the lava in a much better spot, it also means you can use the lava, first of all, to cancel out easy cover. If you start the self-destruct in the easiest place to take cover from the bomb, and then have the bomb land somewhere else, you can make it much harder for them to escape the bomb. I mean, if they do, they can just sit in the lava and die then, I guess. But more importantly, that's a bit niche. Usually there's going to be multiple forms of cover and you're not going to get value off of that. The one thing that protected this item for the #1 spot as worst item in all Stadium is, in fairness, it is difficult sometimes to remech as D.Va when you get out of your mech. And so having the ability to use Vesuvius Protocol to sort of burn up an area, make it so that no one can walk in there without dying. Makes it so you can more easily remech in a little corner without anyone chasing you unless they want to burn in lava. Even then, there are lots of situations where it isn't going to save you, which is why it still sucks and it's still the second worst item in all of Stadium, but it has at least been spared the worst position. But that really might make you think, holy, I mean, like, if Deadeye Cassidy items aren't the worst items in Stadium, if Vesuvius Protocol, the stupid self-destruct diva item, isn't the worst item in Stadium, what is the worst item in Stadium? How bad can it get? It might sound strange, but my pick for number 1 worst item in all of Stadium is Protein Shake. An item that I don't think many people are going to be like, whoa, what the hell? This item's so good. Why you put it here? But they might just be a bit like, huh? Is it really that bad? And I don't know. I guess it's not that bad. But like, how do I put this? I could make a devil's advocate argument that I could believe for just about every item on the entire list we've had so far. Even goddamn Vesuvius Protocol. Do I think it's dumb? Yeah. But like, do I think you could theoretically pull some dumb cheesy strat where it's actually potentially pretty good? I mean, maybe. I think it might be possible. You could dream. I could see it. But while this item seems less obviously egregiously bad on first glance, I just think even in the perfect scenario for this item, it just seems like it wouldn't even be that good. And in most scenarios, it's an item you won't even notice exists. So, yeah. For those of you who aren't familiar, Protein Shake is a survival item for Zarya for 4,000 credits that provides 25 health and a few bonuses that at first might sound okay. It provides 15% bonus to your melee damage, which, hey, that's pretty good. It provides you the ability to knock back people with your melees while you're using Bubble, and it provides Unstoppable, the state where you're completely immune to all forms of CC while you are in your Bubble. So hey, wait, doesn't that sound pretty good? You get a boop on your melee, you get damage buff for your melee, percentage-based damage buff, which is pretty damn good, that stacks multiplicatively with weapon power, and you get complete CC resistance. Isn't that like a good deal? What's wrong here? Well, where do we even start? Let's start with the CC resistance, because that's the easier one. This one is such a trap. You see, I actually got confused when I read this, and the game gaslit me into thinking that I was forgetting about some great interactions or whatever. Because, how do I put this? Aren't you already basically immune to CC when you're in Zarya Bubble? Yeah, I know there's a difference, and we'll get to the very small differences. But actually think for a second. What can actually stun you while you are already bubbled as Zarya? Can Orisa Spear do it? No, it gets eaten by Bubble. Can Sigma Rock do it? No, it gets eaten by Bubble. Can Sleep Dart do it? No, it gets eaten by Bubble. Can Flashbang do it? No, it gets eaten by Bubble. Can Lucio's Boop do it? No, it gets eaten by Bubble. Basically every form of CC in the game already gets eaten by Bubble. So why would you need CC immunity while bubbled? And for those of you who aren't as obsessed with this game, you might actually not be able to think of a single example of a character that can CC you while you're bubbled as Zarya. But in fairness, there are some. It's just most of them aren't in Stadium. You can still get punched by Doomfist, but Doomfist isn't in Stadium. You can still get booped by Ball rolling into you, but Ball isn't in Stadium. Venture can still drill dash you backwards, but Venture still isn't in Stadium. You might get the idea by this point. Basically everyone that would actually be able to CC you while you're in Zarya's bubble isn't in Stadium right now. There are only a few extremely minor exceptions. In fact, I'm not gonna lie, I had to re-record this section because I didn't even think of one of the exceptions until later I was playing Zarya and I had a moment of, oh wait, I suppose that counts. So the one that I did remember is the one that I thought of immediately and I was like, wait, is that it? And yeah, that's basically it. That being that, of course, Ryan can still pin you while you're bubbled, which is technically a form of CC. Of course, if you had the Unstoppable status from Protein Shake, he would just conk against you like a wall. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's going to be some situations where that's a difference maker, but in most cases, if you hit your bubble by the time you're pinned by Reinhardt anyway, you're probably going to eat the damage of the pin with bubble. So the only reason it would actually matter is if the pin was going to put you in a bad enough position that you really, really needed it to not move you. But that just seems very, very niche. The only other thing that you can use it versus is Ash's Bob. Specifically, the thing where when he runs into you when he's first deployed and he throws you into the air. If you have a bubble up and you have Protein Shake, you can just tank the Bob and block it. But yeah, these are some extremely niche circumstances. All other forms of CC that exist in Stadium right now do not bypass Bubble already, so you don't need an item to give you CC resistance. But hey, melee builds are fun, right? Maybe a little quirky, maybe a little silly, but you know, they can work. Here's the thing though. Why in God's name would you be running a Zarya melee build? You have no mobility. And on top of that, your weapon does stupid damage numbers and your punch does nothing. Characters that like to use quick melee are characters that are really quick and agile, but don't have a lot of damage output and need to reload really often. Basically, the only thing that Zarya is kind of ticking here is while she doesn't have to reload that often, she does have a relatively long reload. So yeah, sometimes I punch on Zarya because I get someone to 1, but I need to reload and I just punch him and kill him. For the most part though, I'm not gonna lie, I feel like you get very few chances to punch people in general as Zarya. The only mobility ability you can use to really make that happen is the ability where when you bubble your allies, you yoink yourself over to them. You could try and combine that with the ability where you get move speed when you bubble, but the problem with that is you just use a bubble on an ally, so you spare them, not yourself. So then you would have to bubble yourself as well. You're seeing the issue here? So what, you're gonna like double bubble just to approach, just so you can go for a punch, and do a 40 damage punch that gets a 15% damage boost to be a grand total of a 46 damage punch instead of a 40 damage punch. Right. But then hey, no, maybe you make use of the knockback. But that's the problem, the knockback is like nothing. I'm not gonna lie, call it stupid, call it a dumb idea, say it's comical. I genuinely think if they have to do just a quick tweak to Protein Shake to just make it like a decent item, no joke, I think they should just make the knockback on Protein Shake's punch stupid. Like, just make it like Lucio Boop on steroids. Like, you get punched and you go fucking flying. I mean, it's so hard to even get close enough to get a punch on Zarya in the first place anyway, and this item is so niche as it is, just let it have stupid knockback. So yeah, I'll be honest. I completely get it if you think I'm being a bit harsh on this item, but I just look at the criteria that I've had for this list throughout the video, and I feel like this is hitting every single mark. It's niche, it's desperate, but even in its niche, it's not really the best. It doesn't even provide that much when you find the dream scenario for it. The synergy it's trying to seemingly do seems to contradict heavily with the fundamental design of the character it's placed on, and it can't be saved by having good pure stats to back it up because it's 25 health for 4,000 credits. And again, I like melee builds, but 15% melee damage on a character that doesn't even like using melee is literally just going from 40 damage punch to 46 damage punch. Like, no, just use your beam. With all that said, it's finally over. The 15 worst items in Stadium. Hopefully you enjoyed and learned a little bit about some of these items watching this. And now you can take some time to actually learn about some good items in Stadium, now that you know the bad ones to steer clear of. All that being said, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.